Hello everybody, welcome back to this mini-series about breathing. I'm still talking about regulating the nervous system. Today I want to talk about counting the breath. That's a very classical, almost traditional form of working with the breath. When you're looking up the more traditional pranayama breathing exercises and practices in the yoga tradition, there is a lot of that where there we talk about actually controlling the breath, and very often we would add some form of kind of ratio counting to whatever practice we might be doing. And in some way, in that tradition, it is also a way of possibly, sort of going a little bit deeper with each exercise. So what we are looking at is the 4 phases of the breath, more commonly known, of course, as the inhale and the exhale. That's what we think of when we are, looking to define what is the breath. We have these 2 very dominant phases, but of course there is also that moment between the inhale and the exhale at the top, and then that moment between the exhale and the inhale at the bottom. So that actually makes it 4 phases to make up the full breath. And so each of those phases could last a certain period of time. So you could assign a count to each one of them. You could make them an equal duration, for example. So let's pick the number 4. We could count to 4 on the inhale and then hold the breath for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold the breath out again for 4 as well. Call that kind of sort of square breathing. You can see how that might be an option to visualize breathing along an actual square with equal sizes. And of course we can mix that up in ultimately any shape or form. And if we don't want to add breath retention, we would effectively assign a 0 to that. In a way, there is always a little bit of a natural pause. So you could probably assign half a count or a count to the little moments between, regardless. But if that's not the purpose of the exercise, then we would assign a 0 to that. But what we could do, for example, is to notice the pause, for example. So that could be another way of looking at these 4 phases, like take a breath in to the count of 4 if you wanted to count. Notice the pause, exhale for another count. So why would we want to do that? So again, I guess the intention is to find a way to help people deepen their breathing and potentially elongating the exhalation, both of which will act on the parasympathetic nervous system, bringing the body into more of a relaxation response, countering the stress levels in our system. Kind of one slight issue I take with it, I think, my take on it, is that it sort of makes it a little bit goal orientated. It's kind of like, but I want to get to that. There is the optimum count somehow, so we're sort of setting a bit of a target. And, for some of us that will be helpful, but I would argue that for some of us that isn't, because, we're all going to be at a different place with it. And it's, in my mind, more important to be okay with what is, to notice what is and be with that and free the breath. And so I take slight issue with the terminology, I guess, in the more traditional practices of controlling our breath, when really in my mind it's about freeing the breath. And I will talk about that a little bit more in the next chapter when we are talking about awareness and relation. But I also do work with counting the breath. And of course we can go about giving lots of different options there. Encouraging people to really find their comfortable counting level and their pace. And then that creates a framework for them and a structure. Structure creates harmony in most cases. So that can be really helpful. So I know this is my framework. This is how I'm breathing, and that's what I'm going to carry on doing. So I can sort of orient myself on that, and that can be really helpful. So I don't get lost and I don't get distracted. I don't get carried away. I don't float away or whatever it might be. The counting could almost be your anchor. The counting could also be just enough, you know, as a little task for your brain, again, to stay with the breath. So if you find quieter practices quite challenging in the sense that, you know, your thoughts wander off so quickly and you get distracted by whatever is going on around you, or your shopping list, or what's happening tomorrow, or whatever story, having to do some counting could be just enough, you know, almost like a little trick to keep you there, to keep you present, so you've got something to do. And so that can be a really helpful tool. And in that context, I really like working with counting the breath. So I think that can be really helpful as as kind of like a support, a help, an aid in a sense. And it's accessible. Everybody can find their own rhythm. You could be breathing really slowly. You could find a slightly faster pace. So you're actually also fostering checking in and making a good choice for yourself, which, you know, I'm not sure everybody always sort of makes or feels encouraged or even allowed to do. So in this way, you know, if you're placing it in that way of finding your right count, finding your own pace that really suits you, that really works for you, you're kind of fostering, making really positive choices for yourself. And I think that is also a really positive side of possibly using a counter breath. And then we also have, you know, quite well-known counter breath patterns. We've got the 4, 7, 8, for example, where we are holding for 7 counts and exhaling for 8. That can be quite a helpful breath for people who are already more, let's say, comfortable. I think working with the breath retention and with elongating the exhalation, that particular breath has had really positive results, reported results of calming, regulating the nervous system. Some people have found that even helpful with going to sleep. Others have found that really helpful as a kind of mini tool to do 5 rounds of it before they have to sort of face a more challenging situation before going into a meeting, or I don't know, something like that. A counted breath pattern, if you sort of found that exercise that you like, that suits you, is also great to do sort of almost without anyone noticing. You could do it sitting on a train, for example, on your way to somewhere that you know is going to be a little bit stressful, or you know, to calm down from your way on your way from work, or whatever it might be. So that's another great thing about using counter breathing exercises. You can do them literally without anyone noticing, and it's available, accessible to you. You're not kind of, you know, you don't have to close any nostrils or make any funny sounds or exhale through the mouth or anything like this. Nobody would even know that you're doing it. So that's, I think, also a great aspect about doing counted breathing. There is another exercise that I do really quite enjoy, and that is, so remember we were talking about the different phases of the breath and the ratios, the counts that we can add to all of them. To inhale freely, no count, you decide. So you take a free breath in. Then there's a 0, there is no holding the breath. We exhale to the count of 4, and then we pause for 2 counts. So that's a relatively short breath ratio sequence. We'll do that for a few rounds, but then what we do, we build up the length of the exhalation. So we go to count of 5, to 6, to 7, to 8, maybe to 10, maybe to 12, find somewhere comfortable. Always with that pause of 2 at the end, always with the breath in free. And so we're slowing down. What are we doing? We're going into parasympathetic mode. However, what we then do, we reverse it. And then we count back down from 12. We do a few rounds at 11, a few rounds at 10, a few rounds at 9, so on and so on and so on, a few rounds at 4, with all of the rest staying the same. And that's really interesting to observe, because then we're coming from a place of being more relaxed, things have slowed down, but we're not going and dozing off. We're not kind of going to go and lose ourselves. We are waking up again. We are bringing a little bit of activation mode back into our system. And so this can be a really great exercise to help us even observe those aspects of our nervous system, which can be really, well, kind of almost fun, I would say, but I think really helpful to get a felt sense of all of this. Is so important that it doesn't only remain a theory or information, but that our bodies actually get a real sense of it and understanding too. So that's a kind of fun exercise to, fun exercise to play with. I think a helpful exercise to play with. So it's kind of also about finding, like with everything in my mind, the why do you want to do it? Why? What's your why? The small why or the bigger why? It doesn't really matter. And then doing it with kind of that in mind. Thank you so much for watching. That's about regulating the nervous system a little bit more. And yeah, I'll see you again in my next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, everyone.